There is a very specific, suffocating kind of silence that happens right before you are completely written off by the world. It is not the loud, explosive silence of a dramatic rejection. It is the quiet, dismissive silence of people who simply do not believe you are worth the oxygen it would take to insult you. That is exactly where we find our protagonist at the opening of Penjaga Para Devi, standing in the pouring rain of the academy courtyard, covered in the mud of a training exercise he was never meant to survive, let alone win. The camera does not pity him. It lingers on the dripping hems of his uniform, the tremor in his hands that he is desperately trying to hide, and the blurred, laughing faces of the elite students walking past him under their enchanted umbrellas. It is a masterclass in establishing stakes without a single line of exposition. You feel the cold. You feel the absolute, crushing weight of being at the very bottom of a magical hierarchy that values raw, inherited power above all else. And honestly, it is that visceral grounding in human humiliation that makes the eventual ascent so intoxicating. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Here on Jonota News, we usually tear apart the mechanics of why certain stories resonate while others fall flat, but today, we are looking at a 2026 release that somehow managed to take one of the most exhausted tropes in fantasy fiction and inject it with a startling amount of emotional truth. Before we dive deep into the mud and the magic, if you appreciate long-form analysis that actually respects your intelligence and doesn't just read you a wiki summary, take a second to hit that subscribe button. It really helps keep the lights on and the deep dives coming. Now, just a quick heads up on how we are handling the story today. We are going to be navigating the moderate spoiler zone. I will be discussing the foundational turns, the character dynamics, and the massive mid-game shifts that define the narrative, but I am keeping the final curtain call and the ultimate late-game reveals completely under wraps so you can still experience the ending blind. Let us talk about the world building. Because Penjaga Para Devi does not just give us a magic school, it gives us a meticulously designed engine of oppression. The academy is not a place of wonder. From the very first establishing shots, the architecture is imposing, brutalist, and cold. The stone walls seem to absorb the light, and the color grading in these early episodes is heavily desaturated, leaning into sickly greens and oppressive grays. It visually communicates that this is not a place where dreams are nurtured, it is a factory where the strong are polished and the weak are discarded. Our main character is the ultimate discard. He is introduced as the weakest attendant, a student who cannot even compel the lowest tier slimes or basic elemental sprites to form a contract. In a world where your worth is literally measured by the spiritual entities you can bind to your soul, being unable to form a single bond is akin to being born without a pulse. The show takes its time letting us sit in this inadequacy. We watch him fail. We watch him study ancient texts by candlelight until his eyes bleed, trying to find a theoretical workaround for a biological and spiritual deficit. The actor playing him deserves immense credit here. It would be so easy to play this role with a constant, whining angst, but instead, he plays it with a quiet, simmering exhaustion. There is a micro-expression he uses, a slight tightening of the jaw and a deadening of the eyes, whenever an instructor looks right through him. It is the look of someone who has internalized the world's cruelty but refuses to let it extinguish his core. But of course, a story about the bottom rung is only compelling if the ladder eventually drops. And when it drops in this series, it does not come with a triumphant brass fanfare. It comes with terror. The inciting incident occurs during a mandatory, highly supervised dungeon crawl that goes catastrophically wrong. The elites panic. The instructors are separated. And our protagonist, left for dead in the collapsing lower levels, stumbles into a forgotten, sealed antechamber. This is where the series shifts from a standard underdog story into something bordering on cosmic horror. He finds the remnant. Not a shiny sword, not a glowing amulet, but a petrified, weeping stone that pulses with a heartbeat that sounds like grinding tectonic plates. This is the soul bond of the Grand Magus Merlin. The lore of this universe treats Merlin not as a benevolent wizard, but as an ancient, terrifying force of nature who broke the rules of reality. When the protagonist touches the stone, the inheritance is not a gift, it is an invasion. The sound design in this sequence is absolutely phenomenal. The ambient noise of the dungeon drops out completely, replaced by a high-pitched, ringing frequency that slowly morphs into a chorus of whispering, overlapping voices. The camera work becomes erratic, mimicking his neurological overload as centuries of magical theory, forbidden spells, and the memories of a mad genius are violently downloaded into his fragile mind. You do not feel like he has won the lottery, you feel like he has survived a car crash. And yet, from that wreckage, power blooms. But here is where the show makes its first brilliant subversion. When he emerges from the dungeon, he does not suddenly start throwing fireballs and declaring himself a god. The power of Merlin's soul bond is not about flashy destruction, it is about the absolute, undeniable authority over the spiritual realm. He discovers that he can form the impossible bonds. The entities that the Academy teaches are unbindable, chaotic, or mythically extinct suddenly recognize the ancient signature in his soul. The first time we see this in action is a scene that gave me genuine chills. A mid-tier shadow beast, one that had just effortlessly slaughtered a team of senior students, corners him in the forest. The lighting is pitch black, save for the bioluminescent glow of the beast's eyes. The protagonist does not raise his hands. He does not chant. He simply looks at the creature, and the ancient, heavy aura of Merlin bleeds into his voice. He speaks a single, resonant command. The beast does not just submit, it unravels, its shadowy form collapsing into a stream of pure, obedient energy that wraps around his arm like a living tattoo. The silence that follows is deafening. It is the moment the food chain is permanently rewritten. But what I love most about this sequence is the protagonist's reaction. He is not exhilarated. He is horrified. He looks at his arm, trembling, realizing that he is now carrying a weapon that could level the very institution that tortured him. So, what happens when the boy who was treated like dirt suddenly holds the power to turn his abusers into ash? Does he become the villain, or does he try to play the hero? That is the central tension that drives the entire mid-season arc, and the answer is far messier and more human than you might expect. Penjaga Para Devi refuses to give us a clean, straightforward revenge fantasy. Instead, it explores the paralyzing isolation of sudden, overwhelming strength. When he returns to the academy, the color grading subtly shifts. The oppressive grays are still there, but now, there are sharp, piercing highlights of gold and deep violet whenever he uses his sight to perceive the spiritual world. He is walking among the people who mocked him, but he is no longer in their world. He is operating on a completely different frequency. The show uses brilliant blocking to emphasize this. In the cafeteria scenes, the camera often places him in the center of the frame, surrounded by a sea of chattering students, but the depth of field is incredibly shallow. Everyone else is a blur. He is in sharp focus, utterly alone, burdened by the whispers of the ancient spirits that now share his headspace. It is a profound visual metaphor for imposter syndrome, elevated to a mythological scale. He has the power of a god, but he still feels like the weak boy in the mud, terrified that at any moment, the illusion will shatter and they will all see him for the fraud he believes himself to be. This brings us to the core mechanic of the show, the impossible bonds. In most fantasy series, collecting spirits or monsters is treated like a card game. You catch them, you use their stats, you move on. But here, the Devi, the goddesses and ancient spirits he binds, are fully realized characters with their own traumas, agendas, and emotional baggage. Because he inherited Merlin's bond, he does not enslave them through dominance, he connects with them through resonance. He attracts the broken, the forgotten, and the feared entities of the magical world. There is a stunning sequence in the 4th episode where he forms a pact with the spirit of decay, an entity that the academy textbooks describe as a mindless plague. When he enters her domain, a beautifully animated, decaying garden where time moves backward, the music swells with a melancholic cello arrangement. He does not fight her. He sits with her. He listens to the centuries of loneliness that drove her mad. The animation here is breathtaking, shifting from harsh, jagged lines to soft, watercolor strokes as she realizes he is not there to conquer her. By offering her empathy instead of subjugation, he gains an ally of terrifying power. It is a beautiful thesis statement for the entire series. True strength is not the ability to destroy, but the capacity to understand and integrate the broken parts of the world. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. An overpowered protagonist who collects mythical beings and goes from zero to hero? Haven't we seen this 1,000 times in light novel adaptations and webtoon dramas? And you would be right. The OPMC trope is usually a lazy crutch used to bypass character development in favor of cheap dopamine hits. But here is my somewhat contrarian take. Penjaga Para Devi actually uses the overpowered trope as a Trojan horse to deliver a scathing critique of systemic inequality. In most shows, the protagonist becomes strong and then simply takes his rightful place at the top of the hierarchy, proving that the system works if you are just special enough. This show argues the exact opposite. Even when our protagonist becomes undeniably the strongest mage in the academy, the system still rejects him. The faculty does not celebrate his growth, they fear it. The elite families do not respect his power, they plot to steal it or destroy him to maintain their monopoly. His overwhelming strength does not fix the broken world, it merely illuminates how deeply rotten the foundations are. The show posits that in a corrupt meritocracy, being the best at their game does not make you a winner, it makes you a target. It is a surprisingly mature thematic layer for a show that also features explosive magical battles and beautiful spirit designs. I have to be honest with you all for a moment. Watching this particular dynamic unfold hit me much harder than I anticipated. There is a specific kind of grief that comes from finally achieving the thing you were told you could never have, only to realize that the people who denied you are never going to apologize. They will just change the rules. There is a scene late in the first half where a senior instructor, a man who once publicly humiliated the protagonist for failing a basic levitation charm, is forced to ask for his help to contain a magical breach. The instructor does not say thank you. He does not acknowledge his past cruelty. He simply barks an order, his voice trembling with a mix of desperation and wounded pride. And our protagonist just looks at him. The silence stretches. The camera pushes in on his eyes, and you see a flicker of the old, terrified boy, quickly swallowed by a cold, ancient apathy. He helps the instructor, not out of loyalty, but out of a profound, detached pity. Watching that scene, I felt a lump in my throat. It perfectly captured the hollow victory of outgrowing the people who once held power over you. You do not get closure. You just get distance. And sometimes, that distance is the loneliest place in the world. To make this thematic exploration work, the antagonists need to be more than just cartoonish bullies, and thankfully, the writers understood the assignment. The primary foil to our protagonist is the top-ranked student, a prodigy born into the most prestigious magical lineage. But instead of playing him as a sneering, one-dimensional villain, the show paints him as a tragic prisoner of expectations. He is a character who has never known anything but the absolute peak of the hierarchy. And his entire identity is built on the premise that his superiority is a natural law. When the protagonist begins to rise, it does not just threaten the prodigy's rank, it threatens his fundamental understanding of reality. The psychological warfare between these two is some of the best writing in the series. They rarely engage in direct magical combat in the early stages. Instead, they fight through proxies, through academic sabotage, and through subtle, venomous conversations in the academy's grand library. The dialogue in these scenes is razor-sharp. The prodigy speaks in elegant, perfectly structured sentences that hide a deep, frantic insecurity, while the protagonist, still adjusting to his new reality, speaks in blunt, unpolished truths that cut through the aristocratic veneer like a knife. It is a clash of ideologies, the belief that power is a birthright versus the reality that power is a chaotic, unpredictable force. Let us talk about how the show visualized this clash, because the magic system in Penjaga Para Devi is a triumph of art direction. Magic in this world is not just glowing lights, it has texture, weight, and consequence. When the elite students cast spells, their magic is geometric, precise, and sterile. It looks like architectural blueprints made of light, reflecting their rigid, controlled upbringing. But when the protagonist channels the soul bond of Merlin, the magic is organic, chaotic, and deeply unsettling. It looks like liquid obsidian, twisting and boiling with a life of its own. During the mid-season tournament arc, there is a confrontation where the protagonist is forced to reveal a fraction of his true power. The editing in this sequence is masterful. It starts with the standard, fast-paced cuts typical of action anime, but as he taps into the ancient bond, the frame rate seems to drop, giving his movements a heavy, inevitable quality. The sound of the crowd fades into a low, rhythmic thrumming, like a heartbeat. When he finally releases the spell, it does not explode, it consumes. The geometric shields of his opponent shatter like cheap glass, and the screen is flooded with that beautiful, terrifying black and violet energy. It is a visual representation of a paradigm shift. The old rules no longer apply. But a protagonist is only as compelling as the people around him, and the supporting cast in this drama provides a crucial emotional anchor. When he was the weakest student, he had a small, ragtag group of friends, other outcasts and low-tier mages who banded together for survival. As he ascends, the show bravely explores how his sudden power fractures these relationships. It is a painful, realistic dynamic that most power fantasies gloss over. His friends do not just cheer him on, they feel alienated. They feel useless. There is a heartbreaking subplot involving his closest friend, a girl who specializes in defensive barrier magic. She spent years trying to protect him when he was weak. Now that he is untouchable, she has lost her purpose in his life. The show handles this with incredible nuance. He tries to include her, tries to pretend nothing has changed, but the power imbalance is an elephant in the room. The guilt he feels for outgrowing his support system is palpable. It adds a layer of tragic irony to his journey. He gained the power to protect everyone, but in doing so, he pushed away the only people who actually cared about him when he had nothing. It is a brilliant subversion of the harem or loyal retainer tropes that usually plague this genre. So, how does a story maintain its tension when the main character can essentially snap his fingers and end most conflicts? That is the trap that kills so many overpowered protagonist narratives, but Penjaga Para Devi sidesteps it by shifting the stakes from physical survival to moral and existential survival. As we cross the midpoint of the season, the narrative expands beyond the walls of the academy. The impossible bonds he has formed begin to attract the attention of forces far older and more dangerous than arrogant students. The lore of the Devi is expanded, revealing that Merlin's original downfall was not due to a lack of power, but because the bonds he formed demanded a toll that eventually consumed his humanity. The protagonist begins to experience the same symptoms. He loses time. He wakes up with ancient languages written in his own handwriting. The spirits he has bound are not just lending him power, they are slowly overwriting his identity. The tension is no longer about whether he can win a fight, it is about whether he will still be himself when the dust settles. This psychological horror element elevates the show from a fun fantasy romp to a gripping character study about the cost of ambition and the danger of losing oneself in the pursuit of validation. I cannot overstate how much the sound design contributes to this creeping sense of dread. The composer for this series deserves an award. The main theme is a sweeping, orchestral piece that feels triumphant, but if you listen closely, there is a discordant, atonal undercurrent that grows louder as the season progresses. Whenever the protagonist uses the deeper levels of Merlin's bond, the sound mix isolates specific frequencies. The rustle of clothing, the breathing of the characters, the ambient wind, all of it is stripped away, leaving only a heavy, distorted bass drop that vibrates in your chest. It makes the magic feel dangerous, almost radioactive. There is a specific auditory motive for the spirits themselves. Each Devi has a unique sonic signature. The spirit of decay sounds like dry leaves and whispering static, the spirit of the storm sounds like distant, muffled thunder. When they speak to him in his mind, their voices are panned dynamically in the stereo mix, swirling around the viewer's head, creating a claustrophobic, immersive experience. You feel the invasion of his mind. You understand why he is so terrified of going to sleep. The audio landscape is a character in its own right, constantly reminding us that this power is not a gift, but a haunting. Beneath the magic and the psychological thriller elements, Penjaga Para Devi is quietly delivering a masterclass in societal commentary. The Academy is a microcosm of a deeply stratified society, and the show does not pull its punches when critiquing the myth of meritocracy. The instructors constantly preach that hard work and talent are the only metrics of success, yet the system is entirely rigged in favor of those born with high-capacity manawains and wealthy family names. The protagonist's journey is the ultimate indictment of this lie. He worked harder than anyone, yet he was treated like garbage. He only gained respect when he acquired a power that completely broke the established rules. The show asks a deeply uncomfortable question: if the system is fundamentally unjust, is it morally wrong to tear it down? As the protagonist begins to use his impossible bonds to challenge the Academy's authority, refusing to participate in rigged duels, protecting lower-tier students from abusive seniors, and exposing the corruption of the faculty, he transitions from a passive victim to an active revolutionary. But the show is smart enough to know that revolutions are messy. His actions cause chaos. Innocent people get caught in the crossfire of his defiance. The narrative refuses to give him a clean, righteous path. When the action does happen, it is a revelation. The director understands that action without emotional stakes is just noise. Every major confrontation in the mid-season is built on a foundation of simmering tension. Take, for example, the expedition to the Whispering Wastes. The pacing here is deliberate, almost agonizingly slow. We spent 3 episodes just traveling through a hostile, alien landscape, building the dynamics between the protagonist, his fractured friend group, and the elite students who are forced to rely on him. By the time the ambush happens, we are deeply invested in the survival of every character on screen. The battle choreography is fluid and brutal. There are no endless monologues mid-fight. Spells are cast with lethal intent, and the environment is used as a weapon. The protagonist's use of the impossible bonds in this sequence is tactical, not just flashy. He uses the spirit of decay to rust the armor of a giant golem, then uses a kinetic spirit to shatter the weakened metal. It shows that he is not just relying on raw power, he is using his intellect, a callback to the days when he had to study theory because he lacked practical ability. The editing during these fights is rhythmic, cutting on the impact of spells to maximize the visceral punch. For all its heavy themes and psychological dread, the show also possesses a surprisingly sharp sense of humor. It is not the slapstick, exaggerated comedy that often ruins the tone of fantasy dramas. Instead, it is a dry, character-driven humor born from absurdity and self-awareness. The protagonist, having spent years being ignored, has developed a deeply sarcastic internal monologue that occasionally bleeds into his spoken dialogue. When an arrogant noble challenges him to a duel of honor, complete with a 10-minute speech about lineage and destiny, the protagonist just stares at him, turns to his friend, and asks, "Do you think he'll pass out from lack of oxygen before he gets to the actual spell?" It is a small moment, but it grounds the character. It reminds us that despite the ancient, godlike power coursing through his veins, he is still a tired, cynical teenager who has zero patience for theatrical bullshit. The comedic timing of the voice actor in the original language track is impeccable, delivering these deadpan lines with a perfect blend of exhaustion and amusement. This humor acts as a necessary pressure valve, keeping the show from becoming too oppressive and giving the audience a chance to breathe before the next wave of existential dread hits. As the season pushes toward its climax, the lore surrounding Merlin becomes central to the plot. The show uses beautifully animated, stylized flashbacks to reveal the history of the Grand Magus. These sequences are visually distinct from the main timeline, utilizing a muted, sepia-toned palette with heavy film grain, giving them the feel of ancient, degraded memories. We see that Merlin was not a hero, nor was he a villain. He was a scholar who pushed the boundaries of magic too far, seeking to bridge the gap between the human world and the realm of the Devi. His impossible bonds were not a natural gift, they were the result of a desperate, forbidden experiment that ultimately drove him mad. The tragedy of Merlin is that he achieved ultimate power but lost his ability to connect with humanity. This historical context casts a dark shadow over our protagonist's journey. Every time he forms a new bond, the audience is left wondering, is he walking the same path to madness? The show brilliantly parallels the protagonist's current struggles with Merlin's past failures. The spirits he binds remember Merlin, and their reactions to the new host range from deep reverence to outright hostility. Navigating these ancient grudges adds a fascinating layer of political intrigue to the magical system. Let us return to the emotional core of the show, because the mid-season turning point is defined not by a battle, but by a conversation. The fracture in the protagonist's friend group reaches its breaking point during a quiet, rainy night in the academy dorms. His closest friend, the barrier mage, finally confronts him. She does not yell. She speaks with a quiet, devastating clarity. She tells him that she misses the boy who needed her, and that she cannot stand the god who pities her. The acting in this scene is nothing short of spectacular. The camera stays in a tight shot, refusing to cut away, forcing the audience to sit in the discomfort of their dying friendship. The protagonist tries to argue, tries to explain that he is doing this to protect them, but the words ring hollow even to him. He realizes that his definition of protection has become indistinguishable from control. It is a profoundly mature exploration of how power dynamics can poison even the purest relationships. The show does not offer a neat resolution to this conflict. The friend leaves, and the protagonist is left alone in the dark room, the ambient sound of the rain amplifying his isolation. It is a gut punch that recontextualizes all of his recent victories. He is the strongest mage in the world, and he has never been more powerless. The visual representation of the Devi themselves is one of the most striking aspects of the production design. They are not humanoid anime girls or generic monsters. They are abstract, surreal manifestations of natural and conceptual forces. When the protagonist enters the inner sanctum of his soul to commune with them, the animation shifts into a breathtaking, Salvador Dali-esque dreamscape. Floating staircases, inverted oceans, and skies made of clockwork gears. Each Devi has a domain that reflects their nature. The spirit of storms resides in a perpetual, silent hurricane where lightning freezes in midair. The spirit of memory lives in a library where the books are made of glass and shatter when you read them. These sequences are not just eye candy, they are visual metaphors for the protagonist's internal state. As he grows more powerful, his inner world becomes more chaotic and fragmented. The art direction team clearly had a massive budget and the creative freedom to push the boundaries of the medium. The use of color in these dreamscapes is highly symbolic, with vibrant, unnatural hues contrasting sharply with the drab reality of the academy. It reinforces the idea that the true battleground of the series is not the physical world, but the landscape of the protagonist's mind. While the protagonist grapples with his internal demons, the primary antagonist, the elite prodigy, begins his own dark descent. Unable to cope with the protagonist's ascent, the prodigy turns to forbidden, unstable magic to maintain his superiority. The show handles this parallel arc with great care. We see the prodigy's physical and mental deterioration. His pristine uniform becomes disheveled, his elegant spellcasting becomes jagged and erratic. The lighting in his scenes shifts from bright, clinical whites to harsh, sickly yellows. He is a mirror image of what the protagonist could become if he lets his pride and fear consume him. The tragedy of the prodigy is that he is a victim of the same system that abused the protagonist. He was taught that his worth was entirely tied to his magical output, and without it, he is nothing. When the two finally clash in the late mid-season, it is not just a battle of spells, it is a collision of two broken boys reacting to a toxic world in opposite ways. The dialogue leading up to their fight is sparse, letting the animation and the score carry the emotional weight. You do not want the prodigy to die, you want him to be saved from himself. But the narrative is ruthless, and the consequences of his choices are severe. The climax of the first half of the season is a masterclass in escalating tension and payoff. A massive magical anomaly threatens to consume the academy, a direct result of the faculty's arrogant tampering with ancient ley lines. The instructors are powerless. The elite students are fleeing. And the protagonist, the boy they treated like dirt, is the only one who can stop it. But the show does not give us a simple, triumphant save. To seal the anomaly, he has to fully open the soul bond of Merlin, risking his sanity and his life. The sequence is a sensory overload. The animation reaches its peak, with fluid, dynamic camera movements that follow the protagonist as he weaves through the collapsing architecture. The music swells into a chaotic, choral crescendo. He summons multiple impossible bonds simultaneously, a feat that should be physically impossible. The visual of him standing in the center of the storm, surrounded by the towering, surreal avatars of the Devi, is an iconic image that will stick with you long after the credits roll. But the cost is immediate. As he seals the breach, the screen cuts to black. The silence is absolute. When the image returns, he is on his knees, bleeding from his eyes, his hair turned stark white, a physical manifestation of the toll the magic has taken. The aftermath of this climax fundamentally shifts the tone of the series. The protagonist saved the academy, but he is no longer a student, he is a living weapon, and the administration is terrified of him. The dynamic flips completely. The instructors who once mocked him now speak to him with forced, trembling politeness. The students who bullied him now avert their eyes when he walks down the hall. It is the ultimate realization of his early fantasy, but the show makes it clear that this kind of respect is hollow. It is born of fear, not admiration. The color grading of the academy changes permanently after this event. The oppressive grays are gone, replaced by a stark, blinding white that feels clinical and isolating. He has conquered the hierarchy, but he is entirely alone at the top. The narrative transitions from a story of survival to a story of purpose. What does a boy who has achieved ultimate power do when he realizes the system he fought to conquer is not worth ruling? This existential question drives the character development into the back half of the season, setting the stage for a much larger, more complex conflict that goes beyond the walls of the school. As the scope of the story expands, we are introduced to the political landscape outside the academy. The governing body of mages, a shadowy council that controls the flow of magical resources, takes an interest in the boy who wields Merlin's wand. They do not see a hero, they see a potential asset or a catastrophic threat. The introduction of these political players adds a layer of espionage and intrigue to the fantasy setting. The dialogue becomes sharper, filled with double meanings and veiled threats. The protagonist is forced to navigate a world where a misplaced word can be as deadly as a fireball. The show excels at building tension in these quiet, conversational scenes. A meeting in a dimly lit, opulent boardroom feels just as dangerous as a battle in a dungeon. The protagonist's lack of formal education in politics makes him an unpredictable element, and his blunt, straightforward approach to these manipulative elites is both highly entertaining and deeply satisfying. He refuses to play their games, which makes him incredibly dangerous to their established order. Concurrently, the relationship between the protagonist and the Devi evolves. They are no longer just tools or passive sources of power, they become active participants in his life, offering advice, criticism, and occasionally, outright defiance. The spirit of the storm, a volatile and aggressive entity, frequently clashes with the protagonist's desire for peace. Their internal arguments are voiced over during mundane tasks, creating a brilliant juxtaposition of the epic and the everyday. The voice acting for the spirits is top tier, with each entity possessing a distinct cadence and vocal texture. The spirit of memory speaks in overlapping whispers, while the spirit of decay has a voice like grinding stones. This internal council of ancient beings provides a unique support system for the protagonist, replacing the human friends he has alienated. But it also highlights his growing detachment from humanity. He is spending more time conversing with gods than with people. The show uses this dynamic to explore the theme of isolation at the top. The stronger he gets, the less human he becomes. It is a tragic, beautiful arc that gives the power fantasy a deeply melancholic undertone. Just when the protagonist begins to find a new equilibrium, the past returns to haunt him. A faction of rogue mages, dedicated to resurrecting the original Merlin, targets the protagonist, believing his body is the perfect vessel for their dark ritual. This introduces a new type of antagonist, fanatics who revere the power he holds but despise the person he is. The action sequences involving these rogues are brutal and unforgiving. They use forbidden, blood-based magic that directly counters the protagonist's spiritual bonds. For the first time since inheriting Merlin's power, he is pushed to his absolute limits. The choreography in these fights is desperate and messy. He is not the cool, untouchable god here, he is a survivor fighting for his life. The sound design emphasizes the visceral nature of the combat, the crunch of bone, the tearing of fabric, the ragged breathing. It is a stark reminder that despite his immense power, he is still mortal, still vulnerable. The stakes are raised significantly, as a loss here does not just mean defeat, it means the erasure of his identity and the return of a mad god. This conflict forces the protagonist into a profound moral dilemma. To defeat the rogue mages, he must tap into the darkest, most destructive aspects of Merlin's legacy. The spirits warn him against it, showing him visions of the destruction Merlin caused when he lost control. But the alternative is the death of the few people he still cares about. The show does not shy away from the ugliness of this choice. When he finally unleashes the forbidden magic, it is not portrayed as a triumphant moment. The screen is bathed in an oppressive, blood-red light. The music is discordant and terrifying. The magic he uses is cruel, designed to inflict maximum pain. He wins the battle, but the way he does it horrifies his allies and terrifies himself. The aftermath of this fight is a quiet, devastating sequence where he isolates himself, unable to look at his own hands. The show asks the audience to sit with the discomfort of his actions. It challenges the traditional fantasy narrative that violence, when used by the hero, is inherently justified. Here, the violence leaves a stain that cannot be washed away. In the wake of this darkness, the protagonist makes a desperate attempt to reconcile with his former friend, the barrier mage. He seeks her out, not as a god, but as the broken boy she once knew. The scene takes place in the same ruined courtyard where he was first humiliated in the opening episode. The rain is falling again, bringing the narrative full circle. He does not ask for forgiveness, he simply tells her the truth about what he is becoming and his fear of losing himself completely. The acting here is raw and vulnerable. The walls he built around himself crumble, and we see the terrified kid underneath the ancient power. She does not immediately forgive him. The show respects the damage that has been done. But she offers him a small, tentative bridge, a promise to watch his back, not because he needs protection, but because he needs an anchor to his humanity. It is a beautiful, understated moment of grace in a story that has been relentlessly dark. It provides a glimmer of hope that he might be able to navigate the coming storm without losing his soul. As the season approaches its final act, the true scale of the threat is revealed. The rogue mages were just pawns. The magical anomaly that the protagonist sealed earlier was a symptom of a much larger, systemic collapse. The barrier between the human world and the realm of the Devi is failing. The ancient entities that Merlin originally bound are waking up, and they are angry. The stakes escalate from personal survival to global annihilation. The pacing accelerates, with episodes ending on massive cliffhangers that propel the narrative forward. The visual effects team works overtime, filling the skies with apocalyptic imagery, fractured moons, bleeding auroras, and massive, shadowy figures moving behind the clouds. The sense of impending doom is palpable. The Academy, once the center of the universe, is reduced to a mere staging ground for a war that will decide the fate of reality. The protagonist realizes that his inheritance was not an accident, it was a preparation for this exact moment. He is the only one who can speak the language of the gods, and he must convince them not to destroy the world. To face this apocalyptic threat, the protagonist must do the one thing he has avoided since gaining his power: he must ask for help. He cannot fight an army of ancient gods alone. This leads to a fantastic sequence where he travels across the kingdom, seeking out the other outcasts, the failed students, and the disgraced instructors. He builds a coalition of the broken. The show takes time to revisit these minor characters, giving them moments to shine and demonstrating how their unique, seemingly useless skills are exactly what is needed for the coming battle. The barrier mage's defensive spells, once considered weak, are the only things that can withstand the aura of the ancient gods. The humor returns in these gathering sequences, as the ragtag group bickers and complains, providing a much-needed levity before the final descent into darkness. The protagonist's leadership style is unconventional. He does not command them, he empowers them. He uses his impossible bonds not to fight for them, but to amplify their own latent abilities. It is a beautiful culmination of his character arc, moving from a solitary vessel of power to a true leader who elevates those around him. The episodes leading up to the final are dedicated to the quiet moments before the storm. The characters prepare for a battle they know they might not survive. The writing shines in these intimate, character-driven scenes. We see the prodigy, now stripped of his rank and humbled by his failures, offering his knowledge of the Academy's ancient defenses to the protagonist. Their interaction is tense but respectful, a silent acknowledgement of their shared trauma. We see the protagonist sitting alone in his room, conversing with the spirit of Merlin, not as a master to a servant, but as two weary souls sharing a burden. The animation in these quiet moments is incredibly detailed, focusing on the micro-expressions, the subtle shifts in lighting, and the ambient sounds of the world. The score is minimal, relying on solitary piano notes and the sound of the wind. It is a masterclass in building emotional resonance. The audience is made to care deeply about these characters, so that when the battle finally begins, every loss and every victory feels earned and impactful. Then, the sky tears open. The final battle begins not with a declaration of war, but with a catastrophic failure of reality. The barrier shatters, and the realm of the Devi bleeds into the physical world. The visual spectacle of this sequence is overwhelming. Gravity reverses in certain areas, time loops in others. The Academy is transformed into a surreal, nightmarish battlefield. The animation quality reaches a cinematic level, with fluid, continuous shots that follow the characters through the chaos. The sound design is a wall of noise, roaring entities, crumbling stone, and the deafening crack of magical artillery. The protagonist and his coalition are immediately separated, forced to fight their own desperate battles for survival. The pacing is relentless. There is no time to breathe, no time to think. It is pure, unadulterated chaos. But amidst the noise, the protagonist's focus is absolute. He is no longer the boy in the mud. He is the guardian, and he moves through the battlefield with a terrifying, graceful purpose, his impossible bonds flaring like beacons in the dark. Deep within the fractured reality, the protagonist comes face to face with the source of the breach, a corrupted, primordial Devi that represents the collective rage of the forgotten spirits. This entity is a dark reflection of the protagonist himself, a being of immense power consumed by its own isolation and anger. The battle between them is not just physical, it is a clash of ideologies. The entity attacks him with manifestations of his own doubts and fears, forcing him to relive his greatest humiliations and his darkest moments of cruelty. The animation shifts into a highly stylized, abstract representation of his psyche. He is fighting his own shadow. To win, he cannot use brute force, he must use the empathy that defined his early bonds. He must accept his own darkness, his own anger at the system, and his own fear of becoming a monster. The resolution of this internal conflict is visually stunning, as the dark, jagged energy of his magic slowly transforms into a brilliant, blinding white light. It is the moment he fully integrates the legacy of Merlin without losing his own identity. But defeating the entity is not enough to close the breach. The fabric of reality is too damaged. The protagonist realizes that the only way to seal the rift is to use his own soul as the anchor, effectively sacrificing his connection to the human world to become the permanent guardian of the barrier. It is a devastating realization. The show does not cheapen this moment with a last-minute magical loophole. The protagonist makes his choice with a quiet, heartbreaking resolve. He says his goodbyes, not with grand speeches, but with small, intimate gestures. A nod to the prodigy. A lingering look at the barrier mage. The music swells into a tragic, beautiful crescendo as he steps into the center of the breach. The visual of him dissolving into pure, spiritual energy, his physical form scattering like ash in the wind, is one of the most emotionally resonant moments in recent fantasy television. He saves the world, but he loses his place in it. It is the ultimate fulfillment of the hero's journey, executed with a level of maturity and emotional intelligence that is incredibly rare. The aftermath of the sacrifice leaves the world forever changed. The breach is sealed, but the magic system is fundamentally altered. The rigid hierarchy of the academy collapses as the artificial barriers between different types of magic are broken down. The prodigy takes over the restructuring of the institution, determined to build a system based on cooperation rather than dominance. The barrier mage becomes a teacher, specializing in defensive magic for the weakest students, ensuring that no one is ever left behind again. The show takes its time exploring this new reality, showing the slow, painful process of rebuilding. The absence of the protagonist is a heavy, lingering presence in every scene. They do not build a statue of him, they simply live in the world he saved, carrying the weight of his sacrifice. It is a bittersweet, melancholic tone that perfectly suits the narrative. The show refuses to give us a purely happy ending, opting instead for a hopeful, realistic resolution that acknowledges the cost of peace. But Penjaga Para Devi is not done with us yet. In the final moments of the season, the camera pans away from the rebuilt academy, traveling across the ocean to a desolate, uncharted continent. The landscape is alien, filled with massive, petrified bones of ancient beasts. Deep within a cavern, a single, familiar spark of black and violet energy flickers in the darkness. A hand, scarred and trembling, reaches out and grasps a stone. The screen cuts to black. It is a masterful tease that leaves the audience desperate for more. It confirms that the protagonist is not dead, but he is far from home, stripped of his power, and facing a completely unknown world. It sets the stage for a second season that promises to be even darker, more expansive, and more emotionally complex. The journey of the weakest student is over, the journey of the exiled god has just begun. Let us take a moment to appreciate the sheer technical ambition on display here. The animation studio behind Penjaga Para Devi has a reputation for taking on impossible projects, and this series is their magnum opus. You can see the budget on the screen in every single frame. The integration of 2D hand-drawn animation with 3D CGI environments is seamless. A hurdle that so many modern fantasy adaptations fail to clear. When the camera sweeps through the grand halls of the academy, the 3D architecture provides a sense of scale and depth that would be impossible to achieve by hand, but the characters moving through those spaces remain entirely 2D, preserving the expressive, nuanced art style that gives the show its soul. The lighting engine they developed for this series is particularly noteworthy. Magic in this world is not just an overlay, it is a dynamic light source that interacts with the environment. When the protagonist summons the spirit of decay, the ambient light in the room actually dims, the shadows stretching and warping as if the magic itself is consuming the photons. This level of detail creates a tactile, lived-in world that feels incredibly grounded despite the fantastical elements. The vocal performances are the invisible glue holding this complex narrative together. The lead actor delivers a performance of staggering range. In the early episodes, his voice is tight, constrained, and pitched slightly higher, reflecting his constant state of anxiety and submission. As he inherits Merlin's bond, his vocal register drops. The tension leaves his voice, replaced by a resonant, almost hypnotic calm. But the brilliance of the performance lies in the moments when the mask slips. When he is pushed to his emotional limits, the ancient, godlike cadence fractures, and the terrified, desperate boy bleeds through. You can hear the cracks in his voice, the ragged breaths, the sheer panic of a kid who is in way over his head. It is a masterclass in vocal acting, conveying layers of subtext that the script only hints at. The supporting cast is equally phenomenal. The actor playing the prodigy manages to make a deeply unlikable character sympathetic through sheer vocal vulnerability. His arrogant monologues are always undercut by a slight tremor, a microscopic hesitation that betrays his deep-seated insecurity. It is these micro-performances that elevate the show from a standard fantasy romp to a prestige drama. We have touched on the sound design, but the original score deserves its own dedicated analysis. The composer has created a sprawling, leitmotif-driven soundtrack that rivals the best work in cinematic fantasy. The main theme for the protagonist is a fascinating piece of musical storytelling. It begins as a solitary, fragile piano melody, representing his isolation and weakness. As the series progresses and he forms more bonds, new instruments are layered onto the melody. A mournful cello for the spirit of decay, a sharp, staccato violin for the spirit of the storm. By the mid-season climax, the theme has evolved into a massive, full-orchestra symphony, but if you listen closely, that original, fragile piano melody is still there, buried beneath the brass and percussion, struggling to be heard. It is a brilliant musical metaphor for his struggle to maintain his humanity amidst the overwhelming power. The use of choral arrangements during the scenes involving the ancient Devi is equally inspired. The choir sings in a constructed, fictional language that sounds ancient and guttural, adding a layer of mythological weight to the proceedings. The music does not just accompany the action, it drives the emotional narrative, telling us what the characters are feeling when they cannot find the words. At its core, Penjaga Devi is a story about the trauma of systemic abuse and the difficult, often painful process of healing. The academy is not just a school, it is a machine designed to break the spirits of those who do not fit its narrow definition of worth. The protagonist's journey is not about proving the system wrong by becoming its master, it is about surviving the system and finding a new way to exist outside of its oppressive logic. The show argues that true power is not the ability to dominate others, but the ability to remain compassionate in a world that rewards cruelty. This theme is explored through the protagonist's relationships with the Devi. The elite students view spirits as tools to be broken and commanded. The protagonist views them as equals, as fellow survivors of a world that fears them. By offering them empathy and respect, he builds a network of genuine loyalty that is infinitely stronger than the forced obedience of the Academy's mages. It is a powerful message about the strength of community and the importance of lifting others up rather than stepping on them to climb the ladder. The structural pacing of the first half of the season is a masterclass in slow-burn storytelling. The writers resist the urge to rush the protagonist's ascent. They spend the first 3 episodes firmly establishing the baseline of his misery, ensuring that the audience fully understands the depth of his humiliation before granting him any power. This makes the eventual payoff incredibly satisfying. When he finally unleashes his power, it is not just a cool action moment, it is a cathartic release of 3 episodes of built-up tension. The mid-season arc then shifts gears, moving from a story of acquisition to a story of consequence. The pacing slows down again, allowing the characters and the audience to process the massive shift in the status quo. The show is not afraid to spend an entire episode on a quiet conversation between 2 characters, knowing that these emotional beats are just as important as the explosive magical battles. This confident, deliberate pacing is a hallmark of a creative team that trusts its audience and its material. The world beyond the academy is hinted at through environmental storytelling and background lore. The architecture of the city surrounding the school tells a story of extreme wealth inequality. The elite districts are built of gleaming white marble, floating above the ground on anti-gravity enchantments, bathed in perpetual sunlight. The lower districts, where the unmagical citizens and low-tier mages live, are cramped, subterranean, and lit by flickering, unreliable mana lamps. This visual disparity reinforces the central conflict of the series. The magic system itself is deeply integrated into the economy and politics of the world. Mana is a currency, and the ability to form bonds is a commodity. The show explores the dark side of this commodification, hinting at a black market where spirits are illegally harvested and sold to the highest bidder. This adds a layer of gritty realism to the fantasy setting, making the world feel lived in and complex. The lore of Merlin is not just ancient history, it is a foundational myth that shapes the current political landscape, with different factions interpreting his legacy to suit their own agendas. Let us delve deeper into the character of the prodigy, because he is arguably the most tragic figure in the series. He is not evil, he is a product of extreme, toxic conditioning. From birth, he has been told that he is a god among men, that his magical capacity makes him inherently superior to everyone else. His entire identity is built on this fragile foundation. When the protagonist appears and shatters this illusion, the prodigy experiences a complete psychological collapse. The show handles his descent with remarkable empathy. We see the immense pressure he is under from his family, a lineage of powerful mages who view any sign of weakness as a disgrace. His cruelty towards the protagonist is a defense mechanism, a desperate attempt to reassert his dominance and prove to himself that the natural order is still intact. When he finally breaks, it is not a triumphant moment for the protagonist, it is a sad, inevitable tragedy. The prodigy's arc is a cautionary tale about the destructive nature of unchecked privilege and the hollowness of a life built on the subjugation of others. The spirit of decay deserves special mention, as she is one of the most compelling supporting characters in the show. Her design is hauntingly beautiful, a shifting mass of autumn leaves, ash, and pale, spectral light. She represents the inevitable end of all things, a concept that the magical society desperately tries to ignore or suppress. The protagonist's bond with her is built on a shared understanding of obsolescence. He was discarded by the academy, she was forgotten by the world. Their interactions are quiet, philosophical, and deeply melancholic. She teaches him that decay is not just destruction, it is the necessary precursor to new growth. This philosophy becomes central to the protagonist's approach to magic and conflict. He does not seek to preserve the corrupt status quo, he seeks to let it rot away so that something better can take its place. The animation of her magic is stunning, a beautiful, terrifying display of entropy that turns stone to dust and metal to rust in seconds. She is a constant reminder of the impermanence of power and the inevitability of change. The direction of Penjaga Devi is characterized by a bold, cinematic vision. The director frequently uses unconventional camera angles and framing to convey psychological states. In scenes where the protagonist feels overwhelmed, the camera is often placed low to the ground, looking up at the towering figures of his oppressors, emphasizing his powerlessness. As he gains strength, the camera angles shift, often looking down on his opponents, reflecting his new position of authority. The use of negative space is also highly effective. In moments of intense isolation, the protagonist is framed in the corner of a vast, empty shot, visually communicating his detachment from the world around him. The transition between scenes is often handled through match cuts that link thematic elements, such as cutting from the spinning gears of a clockwork spirit to the grinding stones of a dungeon trap. These directorial choices elevate the material, turning a standard fantasy narrative into a visually striking piece of art. The humor in the show is a vital component of its success. It prevents the heavy themes and dark tone from becoming suffocating. The comedy is largely derived from the protagonist's deadpan reactions to the absurdity of the magical world. Having spent years on the outside looking in, he has a highly critical, cynical perspective on the pomp and circumstance of the elite. When a noble challenges him to a duel and spends 10 minutes reciting his family tree, the protagonist simply turns to the camera and asks if anyone has a sandwich. It is a perfect, self-aware moment that breaks the tension and endears the character to the audience. The interactions between the protagonist and the spirits also provide a lot of comedic relief. The ancient, godlike entities often have petty, mundane complaints, bickering with each other like an old married couple inside his head. This juxtaposition of the epic and the everyday is a hallmark of the show's unique tone, balancing the high stakes of the narrative with a grounded, relatable sense of humor. One of the most refreshing aspects of Penjaga Devi is its approach to romance, or rather, its deliberate avoidance of it. In a genre saturated with forced harem dynamics and unnecessary love triangles, this show remains fiercely focused on its core themes of power, trauma, and identity. The relationships between the characters are built on mutual respect, shared trauma, and deep platonic affection. The bond between the protagonist and the barrier mage is deeply intimate, but it is never romanticized. It is a partnership forged in the fires of survival. By eschewing traditional romance, the show is able to explore the complexities of human connection in a more nuanced, mature way. It argues that love and loyalty are not exclusive to romantic relationships, and that the bonds we form with our friends and allies can be just as profound and life-changing. This decision allows the narrative to maintain its focus and pacing, avoiding the distracting detours that plague so many other series in the genre. The action choreography in Penjaga Para Devi is a masterclass in visual storytelling. The fights are not just displays of flashy magic, they are physical manifestations of the characters' internal conflicts. When the protagonist fights the prodigy, their contrasting styles reflect their opposing worldviews. The prodigy's magic is rigid, structured, and predictable, reflecting his adherence to the rules of the academy. The protagonist's magic is fluid, chaotic, and adaptive, reflecting his survivalist mentality and his connection to the untamed Devi. The camera work during these sequences is dynamic and immersive, often placing the viewer right in the middle of the action. The use of slow motion is sparing but highly effective, used to emphasize the impact of a crucial blow or the emotional weight of a character's reaction. The sound design enhances the choreography, with every spell and impact having a distinct, weighty audio signature that makes the combat feel visceral and dangerous. The magic system itself is a rich source of subtext. The concept of the soul bond is a metaphor for empathy and understanding. To form a bond, a mage must not just dominate a spirit, they must understand its nature, its desires, and its fears. The elite students fail to form strong bonds because they view the spirits as inferior beings, incapable of complex thought or emotion. The protagonist succeeds because he approaches the spirits with humility and a willingness to listen. His power is a direct result of his empathy. This subverts the traditional fantasy trope where power is a measure of inherent worth or genetic superiority. In this world, power is a measure of one's capacity for connection. The impossible bonds he forms are only impossible because the society he lives in has lost the ability to empathize with the unknown. It is a beautiful, resonant message that elevates the magic system from a mere plot device to a central thematic pillar of the narrative. The supporting cast in Penjaga Para Devi are not just props to make the protagonist look good, they have their own fully realized arcs and motivations. The barrier mage's journey from a timid, defensive student to a confident, assertive leader is one of the most satisfying subplots in the series. Her struggle to find her worth in a world that only values offensive power is deeply relatable. The prodigy's fall from grace and subsequent attempt at redemption is a complex, nuanced exploration of pride and vulnerability. Even the minor characters, like the instructors and the lower-tier students, are given moments of depth and agency. The show takes the time to explore how the protagonist's ascent affects the entire ecosystem of the academy. His actions inspire some, terrify others, and force everyone to reevaluate their place in the hierarchy. This interconnected web of character dynamics makes the world feel alive and reactive, a place where actions have real, lasting consequences. The lore of the Devi is vast and deeply intertwined with the history of the world. They are not just magical creatures, they are the personifications of fundamental concepts: time, memory, decay, storm, life, and death. The show explores the idea that these entities were once worshipped as gods by ancient civilizations, but as human magic evolved, they were hunted, bound, and subjugated. The protagonist's ability to form the impossible bonds is a return to the old ways, a restoration of the natural balance between humanity and the spiritual realm. The flashbacks to the era of Merlin provide crucial context for this conflict, showing how the original Grand Magus attempted to bridge the gap between the two worlds, only to be destroyed by the hubris of his peers. This historical backdrop adds a layer of mythological weight to the protagonist's journey. He is not just fighting for his own survival, he is fighting to correct a centuries-old injustice and restore a forgotten harmony. Ultimately, the success of Penjaga Para Devi lies in its profound emotional resonance. Beneath the spectacular animation, the intricate magic system, and the epic battles, it is a deeply human story about the struggle to find one's place in a world that wants to crush you. The protagonist's journey from the weakest student to the most powerful mage is not a simple power fantasy, it is a grueling, painful process of self-discovery and healing. The show does not shy away from the trauma of his past or the heavy burden of his new reality. It asks difficult questions about the nature of power, the cost of ambition, and the true meaning of strength. The emotional beats are earned, the character growth is organic, and the stakes feel incredibly real. It is a series that will make you cheer, cry, and think, leaving a lasting impact long after the final credits roll. It is a triumph of storytelling, a testament to the power of empathy, and a must-watch for anyone who appreciates deep, complex, and emotionally resonant fantasy. Let us take a microscopic look at episode 4, which is widely regarded as the turning point of the entire season. This is the episode where the protagonist forms his bond with the spirit of decay, and it is a masterclass in atmospheric storytelling. The episode begins with a stark departure from the usual color palette of the Academy. The harsh grays and sterile whites are replaced by deep, melancholic purples and rotting, autumnal oranges. The protagonist is sent into the Forbidden Quarantine Zone to retrieve a lost artifact, a suicide mission designed by the faculty to quietly dispose of him. The environment design in this zone is breathtaking. It is a ruined, overgrown botanical garden where time seems to be moving in reverse. Flowers bloom and wither in seconds, stone statues crumble into dust and reform. The sound design is equally evocative, filled with the rustling of dry leaves, the dripping of unseen water, and a low, mournful cello melody that seems to emanate from the earth itself. When he finally encounters the spirit, she is not a monster, but a weeping woman made of ash and dead vines. The dialogue in this scene is sparse, relying heavily on the voice acting and the animation to convey the profound sadness of her existence. The protagonist does not use magic to subdue her, he simply sits with her in the dirt, offering his presence as a comfort. It is a stunning subversion of the typical monster-taming trope, replacing dominance with radical empathy. The visual of the black and violet energy of Merlin's bond intertwining with her decaying aura is one of the most beautiful images in the series, symbolizing the union of two broken, discarded entities. Episode 7, the climax of the mid-season tournament arc, is where the show fully flexes its action choreography muscles. The protagonist is forced to compete against the elite students in a public arena, a spectacle designed to humiliate him and reinforce the hierarchy. The arena itself is a marvel of magical engineering, a shifting labyrinth of elemental hazards that the instructors control to favor the elite. The pacing of this episode is relentless. The protagonist's first match is against a master of lightning magic, a student known for his blinding speed and lethal precision. The fight is a brilliant display of tactical combat. The protagonist cannot match his opponent's speed, so he uses the environment and his impossible bonds to control the battlefield. He summons the spirit of the storm to absorb the lightning attacks, turning his opponent's greatest strength into a source of power for himself. The animation during this sequence is fluid and kinetic, with the camera tracking the lightning bolts as they arc across the arena. The sound design is deafening, a cacophony of thunder and shattering stone. But the true brilliance of the episode lies in the aftermath. When the protagonist wins, the crowd does not cheer. They sit in stern, terrified silence. The faculty looks on with barely concealed panic. The victory is not a triumph, it is a declaration of war. The show understands that in a corrupt system, success is the most dangerous act of rebellion. The color theory associated with Merlin's soul bond is a fascinating aspect of the show's visual language. Unlike the traditional elemental magic of the Academy, which is color-coded to its element, red for fire, blue for water, etc., Merlin's magic is an absence of color. It is a deep, consuming void of black and violet, a visual representation of its ancient, primordial nature. When the protagonist uses this magic, it does not illuminate the scene, it absorbs the light, casting long, unnatural shadows. This creates a striking visual contrast during battles, as the bright, colorful spells of his opponents are swallowed by the dark, heavy aura of his power. As the season progresses and the protagonist forms more bonds, the color of his magic begins to shift, incorporating the hues of the spirits he has allied with. The black void is streaked with the autumnal orange of decay, the electric blue of the storm, and the pale white of memory. This evolution of color is a visual metaphor for his growing mastery and his integration of the different aspects of his power. By the time he reaches the climax of the first half, his magic is a swirling, chaotic tapestry of colors, a beautiful and terrifying manifestation of his unique soul. The concept of the impossible bonds raises profound philosophical questions about the nature of free will and consent. In the magical society of Penjaga Devi, spirits are traditionally bound through force, their wills subjugated by the superior mana of the mage. They are treated as slaves, tools to be used and discarded. The protagonist's ability to form impossible bonds challenges this foundational assumption. He does not bind the spirits through force, he forms a symbiotic relationship based on mutual agreement. The spirits choose to lend him their power because he offers them something they have been denied for centuries: respect and understanding. This dynamic shifts the power paradigm of the series. The protagonist's strength is not derived from his ability to dominate, but from his ability to collaborate. It is a powerful critique of the exploitative nature of the magical society, suggesting that true power lies in cooperation and empathy, not in subjugation and control. The show argues that the impossible is only impossible when you approach the world with a closed mind and a clenched fist. Since its release in 2026, Penjaga Devi has had a massive cultural impact, sparking widespread discussion and analysis across social media and critical platforms. Audiences have praised the show for its mature handling of complex themes, its stunning animation, and its deeply relatable characters. The protagonist's journey from the weakest student to the most powerful mage has resonated with viewers who have felt marginalized or underestimated in their own lives. The show's critique of systemic inequality and its emphasis on empathy have struck a chord in a world grappling with similar issues. The animation studio has been lauded for pushing the boundaries of the medium, creating a visual spectacle that rivals major theatrical releases. The original score has become a fan favorite, with the main theme frequently performed by orchestras and covered by musicians around the world. Penjaga Devi is not just a successful fantasy drama, it is a cultural phenomenon that has redefined the genre for a new generation of viewers. One of the most compelling aspects of the protagonist's character is his complex, evolving morality. He is not a traditional, flawless hero. He is a traumatized, angry young man who has been given the power of a god. The show does not shy away from exploring the darker impulses that come with such power. There are moments when he is tempted to use his abilities to exact brutal revenge on those who wronged him. He struggles with the intoxicating nature of his strength, the ease with which he could crush his enemies. But what makes him a compelling protagonist is his constant, agonizing effort to resist these impulses. He is guided by the memories of his own powerlessness, using his past humiliation as an anchor to his humanity. He refuses to become the monster that the Academy created. This internal struggle is the true conflict of the series, far more engaging than any physical battle. The show asks the audience to empathize with a character who is capable of immense destruction, but who chooses, every single day, to be better. The Academy itself functions as a central character in Penjaga Devi, its architecture and layout reflecting the deeply ingrained prejudices of the society it serves. The central spire, where the elite students reside and study, is a towering monolith of white marble and gold, reaching arrogantly into the clouds. It is bathed in perpetual sunlight, a physical manifestation of the privilege enjoyed by those within its walls. In stark contrast, the outer rings, where the lower-tier students are relegated, are cramped, subterranean, and perpetually shrouded in shadow. The buildings here are constructed from rough, dark stone, designed to be functional and oppressive. The pathways between the different tiers are heavily guarded and restricted, physically enforcing the social hierarchy. The protagonist's journey from the outer rings to the central spire is not just a metaphorical ascent, it is a physical invasion of a space that was never meant for him. The show uses the environment to constantly remind the audience of the systemic barriers the protagonist must overcome. Every time he walks through the grand, echoing halls of the spire, the camera emphasizes his isolation, framing him as a dark, chaotic element in a world of sterile, ordered perfection. A subtle but brilliant detail in the show's visual storytelling is the evolution of the protagonist's wardrobe. In the early episodes, his uniform is ill-fitting, faded, and constantly stained with mud or soot. It hangs loosely on his frame, visually emphasizing his physical weakness and his status as an afterthought. As he inherits Merlin's bond and begins to assert his power, his uniform undergoes subtle changes. The fabric becomes cleaner, the fit more tailored. But the most significant change occurs after the mid-season climax. His uniform is irreparably damaged in the battle, and he replaces it with a custom-made coat that blends the traditional academy style with the dark, chaotic aesthetic of his magic. The coat is deep black, lined with violet silk, and features subtle, embroidered runes that glow when he channels his power. It is a visual declaration of his new identity. He is no longer trying to fit into the academy's mold, he is forging his own path. The wardrobe design is a masterclass in visual characterization, using clothing to reflect the internal journey of the protagonist. Penjaga Para Devi understands the power of silence better than almost any other series in the genre. In a medium that often relies on constant exposition and loud action, this show uses quiet moments to deliver its most devastating emotional blows. The director is not afraid to hold a shot on a character's face for an uncomfortably long time, allowing the audience to read the complex emotions playing out in their eyes. The aftermath of major battles is often devoid of music or dialogue, filled only with the ambient sounds of the environment, the crackle of cooling magic, the drip of water, the ragged breathing of the survivors. This use of silence forces the audience to sit with the consequences of the violence, preventing the action from becoming weightless or consequence-free. It is in these quiet moments that the true cost of the protagonist's journey is felt. The silence is not empty, it is heavy with unspoken grief, trauma, and the lingering echoes of the ancient magic that shapes their world. The magic system in Penjaga Para Devi is governed by a complex, internally consistent set of rules that the show takes great care to establish and then subvert. The fundamental law of magic is the principle of equivalent exchange. To create something of equal value must be given. The elite students bypass this law through the use of mana crystals, draining the natural resources of the world to fuel their spells. The protagonist, however, operates outside this system. His bond with the Devi allows him to channel their innate power, but the cost is not material, it is spiritual. Every time he uses their power, he risks losing a piece of his own humanity, his memories, or his sanity. This creates a constant, underlying tension in every magical encounter. The audience knows that every victory comes at a profound personal cost. The show uses this rule to explore the theme of sacrifice, asking what one is willing to give up in the pursuit of power and justice. The magic is not a free pass, it is a dangerous, Faustian bargain that the protagonist must navigate with extreme caution. Beneath the fantasy trappings, Penjaga Para Devi offers a surprisingly nuanced and empathetic representation of mental health struggles. The protagonist's journey is heavily defined by his experiences with trauma, anxiety, and imposter syndrome. The show does not treat these issues as mere plot devices or character quirks, they are central to his internal conflict. The voices of the Devi in his head are often a source of immense psychological distress, exacerbating his feelings of isolation and paranoia. The show depicts his panic attacks with visceral realism, using distorted camera angles, muffled sound design, and rapid, chaotic editing to put the audience inside his experience. His struggle to maintain his identity amidst the overwhelming power of Merlin's legacy is a powerful metaphor for the struggle to maintain one's sense of self in the face of severe mental health challenges. The show's message is one of resilience and the importance of seeking connection, even when the world feels overwhelmingly hostile. It is a deeply compassionate portrayal that resonates with viewers who have faced similar battles. The faculty of the academy are not a monolithic block of evil antagonists, they are a complex, fractured group of individuals with their own motivations and fears. Some are true believers in the system, enforcing its cruel rules with zealous fervor. Others are cynical opportunists, using their positions to amass wealth and influence. But a few are quietly sympathetic to the protagonist's plight, trapped by their own cowardice or the political realities of the institution. The show takes the time to explore the internal politics of the faculty, revealing the deep divisions and power struggles that exist behind closed doors. The headmaster is a particularly fascinating character, a wary, pragmatic man who understands that the system is broken but believes that maintaining order is more important than pursuing justice. His interactions with the protagonist are tense, layered with unspoken threats and reluctant respect. The faculty's reaction to the protagonist's ascent is a microcosm of how entrenched power structures respond to disruptive change, with a mixture of denial, co-optation, and ultimately, violent suppression. When the protagonist enters his inner world to commune with the Devi, the animation shifts into a breathtaking, surreal dreamscape that defies the laws of physics. This inner world is a visual representation of his subconscious, a chaotic, ever-shifting landscape shaped by his memories, fears, and the ancient magic he carries. Floating islands of shattered stone drift through a sky of liquid violet, staircases twist and fold in on themselves like an MC Escher painting, clocks melt and drip over the edges of bottomless chasms. The art direction in these sequences is heavily influenced by surrealism and abstract expressionism, creating a visual experience that is both beautiful and deeply unsettling. The dreamscape evolves as the protagonist's mental state changes. In the early episodes, it is a dark, claustrophobic labyrinth. As he forms stronger bonds and gains a better understanding of his power, the landscape opens up, becoming brighter and more structured. The dreamscape is a brilliant narrative device, allowing the show to explore the protagonist's internal journey in a highly visual, cinematic way. The mid-season twist, revealing that the magical anomaly was caused by the faculty's own experiments, fundamentally shifts the narrative trajectory of the series. It transforms the academy from a mere backdrop into an active, malicious antagonist. The revelation that the institution is willing to risk the lives of its students and the stability of the world in pursuit of greater power shatters any remaining illusions the protagonist had about the system. It also provides a clear, compelling motivation for his rebellion. He is no longer just fighting for his own survival, he is fighting to expose the corruption at the heart of the magical society. The twist is executed with masterful pacing, dropping subtle clues throughout the first half of the season that only become apparent in retrospect. The fallout from the revelation is immediate and devastating, leading to a complete breakdown of trust between the students and the faculty, and setting the stage for the explosive conflicts of the second half. The final battle of the first part of the season is a staggering achievement in animation and choreography. The protagonist faces off against a corrupted, ancient entity that has breached the academy's defenses. The fight takes place in the ruins of the central spire, a location heavy with symbolic weight. The choreography is a beautiful, brutal dance of magic and martial arts. The protagonist uses his impossible bonds in rapid succession, seamlessly transitioning between the powers of different spirits to counter the entity's attacks. The camera work is dynamic and immersive, sweeping through the crumbling architecture and following the combatants as they defy gravity. The use of color is striking, with the dark, chaotic magic of the protagonist clashing against the blinding, sterile light of the corrupted entity. The sound design is a cacophony of shattering stone, roaring magic, and the soaring, tragic score. It is a battle that tests not just the protagonist's power, but his resolve, his morality, and his very soul. The climax of the fight, where he makes the ultimate sacrifice to seal the breach, is a moment of profound emotional and visual impact that leaves the audience breathless. The legacy of Merlin is not just a historical footnote in Penjaga Para Devi, it is a living, breathing force that shapes the modern world. The ancient texts and artifacts left behind by the Grand Magus are highly sought after, treated as sacred relics by some and dangerous weapons by others. The show explores how history is written by the victors, revealing that the official narrative of Merlin as a mad tyrant is a fabrication created by the founders of the academy to justify their monopoly on magic. The protagonist's inheritance of the soul bond forces him to confront this historical lie. As he delves deeper into the memories of the bond, he discovers the truth about Merlin's life, his motivations, and his ultimate downfall. This historical mystery adds a layer of depth and intrigue to the narrative, connecting the protagonist's personal journey to a much larger, centuries-old conflict. The show uses the past to illuminate the present, showing how the sins of the founders continue to poison the current generation. As the protagonist masters his powers, his fighting style undergoes a fascinating evolution. In the early episodes, his combat is desperate, reactive, and unrefined. He relies on raw power and instinct, often taking heavy damage before he can secure a victory. As he forms more bonds and gains a deeper understanding of the magic system, his style becomes more tactical, fluid, and precise. He begins to anticipate his opponent's moves, using the environment and the unique abilities of the Devi to control the flow of battle. By the mid-season, his fighting style is a beautiful, terrifying synthesis of ancient magic and modern tactics. He moves with a dancer's grace, his spells weaving together in complex, devastating combinations. The animation reflects this evolution, transitioning from chaotic, jagged movements to smooth, deliberate choreography. The show uses the protagonist's fighting style as a visual metric of his character growth, demonstrating his journey from a terrified victim to a confident, masterful warrior. Prophecy plays a subtle but important role in Penjaga Para Devi. Unlike many fantasy stories where prophecy is a rigid, unavoidable destiny, here it is treated as a fluid, interpretive guide. The ancient texts speak of a guardian who will either save the world or destroy it, a figure who wields the power of the old gods. Both the protagonist and the elite prodigy believe they are the subject of this prophecy, leading to a fascinating clash of interpretations. The show uses the concept of prophecy to explore the theme of self-fulfilling destinies. The characters' belief in the prophecy shapes their actions, driving them toward the very confrontation the texts foretold. However, the narrative ultimately subverts the trope, suggesting that the future is not written in stone, but is shaped by the choices and actions of individuals in the present. The protagonist's ultimate sacrifice is not the fulfillment of destiny, but a conscious, agonizing choice to break a cycle that has bled generations dry. The show deliberately dismantles the chosen one mythology by framing the protagonist not as a vessel for fate, but as a reluctant architect of a new paradigm. He refuses to be a pawn in a cosmic game scripted by ancient grudges and institutional fear. Instead, he seizes agency, rewriting the rules of engagement through empathy rather than dominance. This philosophical pivot becomes the emotional spine of the second half, transforming the narrative from a power fantasy into a profound meditation on responsibility, sacrifice, and the terrifying beauty of forging your own path when the world offers you only broken maps. As the dust settles from the mid-season breach, the pacing deliberately decelerates, trading explosive set pieces for quiet, aching introspection. This is a risky narrative move, one that often alienates viewers craving constant momentum, but here it feels essential, almost necessary. The Academy is not merely damaged, it is philosophically bankrupt. The old guard is either dead, disgraced, or hiding behind bureaucratic facades, leaving a vacuum that various factions scramble to fill. The prodigy, stripped of his title and his carefully curated identity, wanders the lower districts in a hedge of shame and awakening. We watch him struggle with basic tasks, with making eye contact, with the sheer mundane reality of existing without the armor of superiority. The camera work here becomes intimately handheld, shattering the polished, symmetrical framing of the early episodes. It forces us into his disorientation, making his humbling not a punitive plot device but a genuine, painful process of reconstruction. He learns to mend clothes, to share rations, to listen without planning his rebuttal. It is slow, unglamorous work, but it is the only kind that rebuilds a soul. Meanwhile, the barrier mage steps into a role she never wanted, becoming the de facto leader of the student coalition. Her arc in the latter half is a masterclass in exploring the weight of responsibility. She is no longer the timid girl who hid behind shields, she is the one holding a fractured community together with nothing but grit and memory. But the show refuses to romanticize leadership. We see her collapse in supply closets, shaking with adrenaline and grief. We watch her argue with surviving instructors over resource allocation, her voice cracking under the pressure of impossible choices. The director uses tight, unflinching close-ups during these moments, capturing the micro-tremors in her jaw, the red-rimmed exhaustion in her eyes. It is a visceral reminder that heroes are not born from glory, they are forged in the grinding, uncelebrated daily work of holding things together when everything wants to fall apart. Her journey from protector to leader is not a straight line, it is a series of stumbles, recoveries, and hard-won compromises that feel devastatingly real. But what of the protagonist? His absence becomes a gravitational force pulling every narrative thread taut. The show uses his missing perspective to force the ensemble to evolve independently, proving that true strength is decentralized. We are granted glimpses into his new reality through fragmented, ethereal dream sequences that serve as both psychological landscape and narrative bridge. Trapped in the liminal space between the physical and spiritual realms, he is neither dead nor fully alive. The animation style shifts dramatically here, abandoning the sharp, detailed realism of the Academy for a fluid, watercolor-like abstraction. The world is rendered in soft gradients of indigo, silver, and pale gold, with environments that breathe and shift like living things. He floats through forests of crystallized memory, where leaves chime with whispered regrets. He walks across bridges of solidified time, where footsteps leave fading after images. These sequences are accompanied by a sparse, haunting score featuring solo cello and distant wind chimes, creating an atmosphere of profound solitude and airy beauty. It is a visual and auditory meditation on isolation, forcing the audience to sit with the emotional toll of his sacrifice without the distraction of action or dialogue. The central conflict of the second half is not a war against an invading army, but a battle for the soul of the new world. As the coalition attempts to rebuild, a reformist faction gains traction, led by a former archival mage who believes the protagonist's sacrifice proves that magic itself is inherently destructive. He advocates for a complete severance of the human-spirit bond, arguing that peace can only be achieved by returning to a pre-magical state of controlled stagnation. This ideological war is fascinating because it is fought in town halls, supply councils, and public forums rather than on battlefields. The prodigy and the barrier mage find themselves on opposite sides of the debate, creating a painful, necessary rift in their partnership. The show uses this conflict to explore the seductive danger of reactionary politics in the wake of trauma. When a society is shattered, does it reach for radical openness, or does it retreat into fear and control? The narrative presents both positions with intellectual honesty, refusing to caricature the reformists. They are not villains, they are frightened people who have lost too much and want guarantees. The protagonist's eventual response to this movement will not be a magical display, but a quiet, relentless demonstration of what coexistence actually looks like. I need to pause here because the way this ideological clash unfolds is genuinely unsettling in its modern resonance. There is a sequence during a heated public assembly where the archival mage lays out his vision for a sanitized, predictable future. He speaks with such earnest conviction, such palpable concern for citizen safety, that his argument feels dangerously reasonable. The director frames him in warm, natural lighting, using steady, respectful camera angles that mirror the seductive comfort of authoritarian simplicity. When the barrier mage finally takes the floor to counter him, she doesn't use rhetorical flourishes or grand declarations. She speaks from the ground up, her voice trembling but unwavering. She talks about the students who were discarded, the spirits who were abused, and the quiet, stubborn beauty of those who found strength through mutual dependence rather than hierarchical control. The scene is scored with absolute silence. It's just human voices echoing in a crowded, tense chamber, the weight of the ideas hanging in the air like smoke. It is one of those rare television moments where the drama emerges entirely from the collision of philosophies, and it completely electrifies the room. As the ideological tension threatens to fracture the coalition, the protagonist's condition in the void begins to rapidly deteriorate. His physical form is dissolving, his consciousness fragmenting under the constant pressure of ancient spiritual currents. The Devi warn him that prolonged exposure will erase his humanity, transforming him into another timeless, detached entity. This raises the personal stakes to a devastating level. The characters in the physical world realize that rebuilding the academy is meaningless if they lose the boy who inspired the entire movement. They must find a way to anchor him back to the living world without collapsing the barrier that protects both realms. This requires them to unite not as a military force, but as a community that has finally learned to value interdependence over individual brilliance. The prodigy's tactical precision, the barrier mage's defensive intuition, the rogue scholar's archival knowledge, and the lower-tier student's unconventional spellcraft all become vital components of a single, cohesive rescue operation. The show excels at orchestrating this convergence, making the audience feel the collective weight of their determination. It reinforces the series' central thesis: survival is never a solitary act. The rescue mission itself is a breathtaking exercise in creative problem-solving and emotional synchronization. Unlike the earlier combat sequences, this operation relies on precision, trust, and psychological resilience rather than raw power. The team must navigate a shifting labyrinth of spiritual planes, each environment testing their resolve and forcing them to confront their deepest insecurities. They traverse a canyon of shattered expectations, where gravity pulls upward and the air grows thin with self-doubt. They cross a marsh of lingering regrets, where the ground gives way beneath hesitant steps. They climb a spiral of interwoven memories, where every handhold echoes with a moment they wished they could change. Each locale is a visual metaphor for the internal barriers they must dismantle to save their friend. The choreography is intimate and tactical, emphasizing close-quarters cooperation and nonverbal communication. When one member falters, another adjusts their trajectory without hesitation. The camera lingers on these silent exchanges, a steadying grip on a wrist, a synchronized breath, a shared glance that carries the weight of unspoken promises. It is beautifully executed, proving that the series' most powerful magic has always been its characters' capacity to rely on one another. When they finally reach the protagonist, the reunion is understated but devastatingly effective. He is barely recognizable, his form translucent and flickering like a dying flame, his eyes holding the ancient, weary knowledge of centuries he never lived. He doesn't speak. He simply looks at them, and in that gaze is a lifetime of gratitude, sorrow, and quiet love. The barrier maid steps forward and places her palm against his fading chest, channeling her defensive magic not as a shield, but as a tether. The prodigy follows, then the scholars, then the students, each one offering a fragment of their own spiritual energy to stabilize him. The visual of their combined light weaving together into a luminous, intricate net around his dissolving form is absolutely stunning. The score swells into a tender, soaring arrangement that feels like a physical embrace. But the show doesn't offer a clean extraction. Stabilizing him requires a permanent, irreversible alteration to the magical equilibrium. The artificial walls between the human and spiritual realms must be dismantled, allowing the two worlds to coexist in a state of fragile, uncertain balance. It is a risky choice that will reshape reality forever, and the characters understand the cost. They choose it anyway. The aftermath of this decision is handled with remarkable narrative honesty. The world does not instantly transform into a utopia. In fact, it becomes more chaotic, more unpredictable, and occasionally more dangerous. Spirits walk openly among humans, and magic behaves in ways that no existing treatise can fully explain. There are accidents, cultural clashes, and moments of profound disorientation. But there is also an expected beauty. We see a dismissed student forming a harmonious pact with a creature once deemed unbindable, creating a new hybrid discipline of spellcraft. We see former rivals working side by side to stabilize a volatile energy rift, their combined techniques yielding results neither could achieve alone. We see the protagonist, slowly regaining his physical cohesion, stumbling through a bustling marketplace where he is recognized not as a deity or a cautionary tale, but as a person. The camera follows him through these moments with a gentle, observational rhythm, capturing the small, quiet miracles of a society learning to live with ambiguity. The color grading warms significantly, shifting from the stark, high-contrast palette of the first half to a richer, more natural spectrum that reflects the messy, vibrant reality of the new age. It is a hopeful, grounded resolution that trusts the audience to appreciate the nuance of ongoing growth over a packaged, effortless victory. Let us examine the antagonist of the second half, because he stands as one of the most compelling, tragically human figures in the entire series. He is not driven by malice or a lust for control, he is driven by a deeply rooted, almost suffocating love for his community. He witnessed the collateral damage of unchecked magical ambition, saw the students who vanished into the breach, felt the weight of institutional failure, and concluded that the only way to protect the people he cares about is to eliminate the variable entirely. His methods are uncompromising, but his intentions are pure. The show respects his perspective enough to give him a compelling voice, making his eventual defeat feel less like a triumph over evil and more like a necessary, heartbreaking alignment of diverging paths. When the protagonist finally confronts him, they do not engage in a spell duel. They sit across from each other in a quiet, sunlit archive, having a conversation that is as much about shared grief as it is about conflicting visions of safety. The antagonist breaks down, not in rage, but in profound exhaustion. He admits he is tired of being afraid. The protagonist does not gloat or preach. He simply acknowledges the shared burden of having failed to protect everyone, offering not absolution, but understanding. It is a deeply human moment that elevates the narrative above standard fantasy tropes, reminding us that even our fiercest opposition is often just people trying to navigate a broken world with the limited tools they have. The final act of Penjaga Para Devi is a masterclass in thematic resonance and structural payoff. Every narrative thread woven throughout the first half finds its conclusion in the second, not through heavy-handed moralizing, but through quiet, echoing reflections. The protagonist's journey from the academy's lowest rung to the guardian of a new equilibrium comes full circle when he chooses to teach rather than rule. He returns to the rebuilt institution, not as a master of elite techniques, but as a guide for those who were once told they had nothing to offer. The show dedicates its closing episodes to observing these early lessons, focusing on the nuanced interactions between the protagonist and his first cohort of students. He does not train them to dominate spirits, he teaches them to listen. He does not drill them in combat superiority, he prepares them to face uncertainty with courage, empathy, and adaptability. The animation in these scenes is remarkably grounded, favoring medium shots, natural lighting, and unforced pacing to create an intimate, scholarly atmosphere. It is a slow, deliberate, and deeply satisfying conclusion that serves as a testament to the series' core belief: the greatest magic is not found in spectacular displays of power, but in the quiet, daily work of lifting others up and refusing to let them fall. I want to draw your attention to the final's closing sequence, because it is one of the most emotionally intelligent, structurally confident endings I have ever witnessed in the genre. There are no last-minute battles, no shocking reversals, no sweeping declarations of absolute victory. Instead, the show takes us back to the original courtyard where the story began. The protagonist stands alone in the rain, mirroring the opening shot, but the context has completely transformed. The camera is at eye level, no longer looking up at towering oppressors or down at a humiliated outcast. The sound design strips away the orchestral score entirely, leaving only the gentle, rhythmic patter of rain on wet stone and the distant, muffled hum of a city slowly waking up. A single, ordinary student walks past him, drops a leather-bound journal, and scrambles to retrieve it. The protagonist kneels, helps her, and hands it back with a small, unguarded smile. She thanks him, brushes past, and continues on her path. He watches her go, then looks up at the sky. The clouds are breaking. The light is shifting. And for the first time in the entire series, he does not feel the weight of ancient legacies or the crushing pressure of impossible expectations. He simply feels present. The camera slowly pulls back, rising above the courtyard, above the rebuilt academy, above the sprawling city, until we see the entire landscape bathed in the soft, golden light of dawn. The screen fades to white. No post-credits tease. No franchise setup. Just a quiet, definitive moment of peace. It is breathtaking in its restraint, and it leaves you with a profound, lasting sense of closure. Reflecting on Penjaga Para Devi as a complete work, it is undeniable that this series has established a new benchmark for what fantasy storytelling can achieve when it prioritizes emotional truth over spectacle. It takes a familiar framework, the underdog student, the legendary inheritance, the corrupt institution, and infuses it with such thematic sophistication, visual ambition, and psychological depth that it transcends its genre entirely. The animation is a breathtaking fusion of artistic innovation and technical precision, with every frame serving the story's emotional core. The sound design and original score are not mere accompaniments, they are active narrators, shaping the audience's psychological experience and deepening the show's atmospheric impact. The vocal performances are uniformly exceptional, with a cast that brings nuanced, deeply human interpretations to characters that could have easily collapsed into archetype. But above all, it is the writing that elevates this series. The dialogue is sharp, purposeful, and layered with subtext. The pacing is confident, refusing to rush through emotional beats or gloss over complex moral dilemmas. The exploration of power, trauma, systemic inequality, and empathy is handled with a maturity that is exceptionally rare in mainstream fantasy media. For newcomers to the genre, Penjaga Para Devi serves as an accessible, emotionally grounded entry point that does not rely on prior knowledge of fantasy conventions to land its impact. The world is clearly established through environmental storytelling and character action. The rules of magic are intuitively explained through practical application rather than exposition dumps, and the emotional stakes are universally relatable. You do not need to understand the intricacies of spiritual resonance or mana circulation to feel the weight of the protagonist's struggle. For dedicated fans of the genre, however, the series offers a rich, rewarding experience that subverts expectations while honoring the core appeals of the fantasy tradition. It rewards close attention with hidden details, symbolic imagery, and carefully foreshadowed payoffs. It treats its audience as intelligent participants in the narrative, inviting them to question, reflect, and engage deeply with the material. And for critics and analysts, the show provides a wealth of material for discussion, from its innovative visual language and structural pacing to its nuanced political commentary and psychological character studies. It is a series that demands to be unpacked, debated, and celebrated. If I were to offer any critique, it would be that the middle stretch of the second half occasionally lingers a bit too long on ideological debates, which, while intellectually stimulating and thematically vital, can slow the narrative momentum for viewers who prefer a more consistently action-driven pace. However, even these quieter episodes are rich with character development and philosophical resonance, and they ultimately serve the story's larger emotional arc. The show trusts its audience to sit with discomfort, to wrestle with complex questions, and to find value in the journey rather than just the destination. That confidence is a strength, not a flaw, and it is precisely what separates Penjaga Para Devi from the countless other fantasy dramas that prioritize spectacle over substance, convenience over consequence. In the end, Penjaga Para Devi is a love letter to the underdog, but it is also a clear-eyed, unflinching examination of what happens when the underdog actually wins. It asks whether victory is truly sweet when the system that defined you is dismantled. When the friends you fought for grow apart, when the power you sought isolates you from the humanity you cherish. It answers not with a simple yes or no, but with a quiet, resonant affirmation that healing is a process, not an event. That strength is not the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward despite it. That true magic is not found in ancient bonds or inherited legacies, but in the courage to be vulnerable, to connect, and to care for one another in a world that constantly tries to strip you of it. I remember watching the final late at night, the room completely dark except for the glow of the screen. When that final shot faded to white, I did not immediately turn off the television. I just sat there, letting the silence settle over me, feeling the weight of everything I had just experienced. There is a rare kind of storytelling that does not just entertain you, but changes you, even in small, subtle ways. Penjaga Para Devi is that kind of story. It stayed with me long after the credits rolled, lingering in my thoughts, reshaping how I view power, empathy, and the quiet dignity of ordinary resilience. If you walk away from this series with just one thing, I hope it is the understanding that your worth was never defined by the systems that tried to measure you, and that the greatest magic you will ever wield is the willingness to remain human in a world that constantly tries to strip you of it. For those who are ready to step into this world, to walk the rainy courtyards of the academy, to sit with the ancient spirits in their surreal domains, and to witness a journey that is as much about internal healing as it is about external triumph, Penjaga Para Devi is waiting for you. It is available now for streaming, and it deserves to be watched with attention, with patience, and with an open heart. Whether you are a lifelong fantasy enthusiast or someone who has never ventured into the genre, this series offers a doorway into a narrative that respects your intelligence, honors your emotions, and leaves you with a profound sense of hope. Do not let the familiar premise fool you. Beneath the surface of the magic, the monsters, and the grand battles lies a deeply human story that will resonate long after the screen goes dark. Thank you for spending this time with me, diving deep into the themes, the craft, and the emotional core of this extraordinary series. It is a privilege to analyze and discuss work of this caliber, and I am endlessly grateful for a community that values thoughtful, in-depth conversation about the stories we love. If this review brought you closer to understanding why Penjaga Para Devi has captured so many hearts, or if it simply gave you a new lens through which to view the genre, please share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I genuinely love hearing how different viewers connect with the material in their own unique ways. If you found value in this deep dive, consider subscribing to Jonota News for more long-form analysis that digs beneath the surface of the shows we talk about. We are building a space for honest, nuanced, and emotionally resonant discussions, and you are the heart of it. Until next time, keep watching closely, keep feeling deeply, and never underestimate the power of a story that dares to ask the right questions. I'll see you in the next one.